You're listening to the MindPod Network. Friends and lovers, we all need to buy stuff on the internet from time to time, right? Head on over to zachleary.com and use the Amazon portal to buy your stuff, and a small portion goes to support this podcast. It's all happening. 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 It's all Hello, friends. Welcome to the podcast. Another episode of the It's All Happening with Zach Leary podcast. That's me, your host. Episode 119 of the show. And this week on the podcast, we have Lama Tsultrim Allione, who is a fantastic spiritual icon in the Buddhist tradition and has written a new book called Wisdom Rising, Journey into the Mandala of the Empowered Feminine. She is really just an amazing, amazing soul, and we'll get into more about her work in just a minute. On a very basic level, I tend to notice that our relationship with our own internal compass, our relationship with how it is we feel we are living or leading out our dharma, is largely dependent on how it is we spend our time. All of the things that we do day in and day out, whether it's something to earn money, if it's something to deepen your spiritual practice, if it's something to rock out and have fun with, if it is something to nourish the body and take care of the body temple, if it is something to deepen intimacy with another human being, all of these things, this living alchemy that we call life, this living alchemy that makes up our incarnation, is really time spent. Time spent is really an amalgam of all the choices that we make in how we spend our time. These are the things that we have control over. And this is important because feelings like disappointment, embarrassment, irritation, resentment, anger, jealousy, and fear, instead of being bad news, are actually very clear moments that teach us where it is that we're holding back. They teach us to perk up and lean in when we feel we'd rather collapse and back away. They're like messengers that show us with terrifying clarity exactly where we're stuck. This very moment is the perfect teacher, and lucky for us, it's within us wherever we are. That is a quote from Lama Tsultrim. And one of the many reasons I like that quote so much is because it directly deals with the attributes that we automatically assign negative emotions to. Disappointment, anger, fear, jealousy, all of these things. We basically categorize them and classify them as negative, subpar emotions, experiences, and emotional states that most of the time, it's safe to say, we'd rather not be experiencing them when they are happening, right? However, when they do happen, what is it that we choose to do about it, right? Do we choose to wallow in our self-pity and our self-righteousness and explode in fits of anger? Do we choose to escape into our various sin pleasures that are so delicious and very temporarily satisfying and that take us out of the present moment, but perhaps cause long-term suffering and pain? Or do we choose to step into the solution and find a way to inhabit, to exhibit equanimity in our life. So these choices that we make and how we spend our time, especially how we spend our time in reaction to negative cycles or to, again, I don't like using the word negative, but to states of being, emotional states of consciousness that perhaps aren't so loving, kind, joyous, and free. That is where self-will fuses with Dharma, fuses with grace. So this week on the podcast, we have Lama Tsultrim Allione, who is really one of the icons of the modern spiritual movement in the West. Yeah, I guess this podcast really lately has been on the spiritual tip. What can I say? And I'm so blessed that I have been able to get interviews with these amazing, amazing souls who have interpreted these ancient teachings, these ancient philosophies, and reinterpreted them and presented them to modern Western audiences that otherwise might not have experienced this kind of wisdom and knowledge. So if you go to taramandala.org, you could learn all about Lama Tsultrim. You really just have to read her bio. It's just unbelievable. And she was one of the first women to achieve this level of, seniority, or this level of achievement within her lineage of Buddhism. And she was very instrumental in helping to start the Naropa Foundation in Boulder, Colorado. And currently, she has a new book out. It is called Wisdom Rising, Journey into the Mandala of the Empowered Feminine. This book is really amazing, and it couldn't be more timely as we are seeing the whole paradigm of how the female archetype is living, is hanging out, is being displayed and evolving in modern society. And this book really takes a look at many of the ancient practices surrounding mandala meditation and in relationship to the dakinis, which are an archetype of empowered, fantastically graceful, sexy, knowledgeable, smart, empowered women. And as you see the practice fuse into the model of the dakini, you can really see what she's onto here. So without any further ado, Lama Tsultrim Allione. Lama Tsultrim, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really, really such a pleasure. I've known about your work for a very long time, and I know we're connected in the multiverse through our respective relationships with Ram Dass. And do you keep in touch with Ram Dass?
Yes, I do. He just wrote an endorsement for my book, and I'll be teaching with him in May.
Oh, beautiful.
May of 19. Not this year, but the year after.
At the next retreat?
And not this coming one, but in May of 2019.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, well, Ram Dass, of course, has played such a vital role in my life. And I kind of just wanted to start there, and being the roots of your incarnation, and maybe you can just briefly kind of paint a picture for your formative years and how you found your way into the spiritual path.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was born in New England, in Maine, to a somewhat unusual family. My mother's side of the family, both grandparents had PhDs from Harvard in philosophy, and my grandmother was the fifth woman to get a PhD from Harvard.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
She was very kind of advanced in that sense, but also formative for me in terms of my feminist leanings, because she had to get men to get books out of the Harvard Library for her, because at that time the women's college was Radcliffe, and the women weren't allowed to use the Harvard Library. And so, years later, when I realized I was sort of focusing on the feminine and women, I realized I have that in my family lineage in a way. But anyway, she also gave me my first book in Buddhism. When I was 15 years old, she gave me a book called Zen Telegrams. And it was kind of haikus and brush stroke paintings by Paul Reps. Wow. So that was one influence. And my grandfather also, he was an influence in the sense that he was very devoted to Greece and took us to Greece when I was 11. And he collected Greek vases and coins. And so when I eventually moved to Italy in the 80s, I sort of followed that thread from him. And then my parents, my father was a small town newspaper publisher, and my mother had been a labor mediator in her youth.
Yeah.
And so we moved to New Hampshire when I was 8. And then I think the most formative thing for me was going to India when I was 19, in terms of what ended up being my trajectory.
Yeah.
And I went with my college friend, Vicky Hitchcock, who became a filmmaker and did the film When the Iron Bird Flies. And also she did the film Blessings. I don't know if you have seen either of those. But
the first one.
Anyway,
yeah.
Her father was the consul general in Calcutta. And so we were college dropouts in the hippie era. And
you were
they thought...
You were hitchhiking across northern India, right?
Well, I did. Yeah, I had to kind of escape from the embassy. And and I did escape from the embassy, and then hitchhiked across India with a Japanese traveler friend of mine, and landed in Dharamsala. But that was after I'd been in Kathmandu, which is where I first met the Tibetans.
Yeah.
But in any case, that trip to Asia at the age of 19 and meeting the Tibetans really set my trajectory for my whole life.
By saying that, when you say it set the trajectory for your whole life, like immediately when you had those encounters and got exposed to the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, you felt a calling, you felt at home, you felt like this is what you should be doing?
Yeah, exactly. I would say that what you said, I felt at home, was really odd, because here I was on the other side of the world,
right,
in a completely foreign culture, but I felt at home in a way that I had never felt at home before.
That's an amazing, and I relate in a different way, but that experience, that feeling, it's intangible and tangible at the same time, right? It's like something like a time and a place that makes you feel at home, but it's this intangible quality where everything just falls into place, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It was a feeling of, I guess I could say meaning, that somehow I'd really been looking for meaning and wisdom. And, I came from a really good family and, certainly compassionate people and so on, but I didn't feel my life had any meaning. And somehow meeting the Tibetans and then starting to study the Dharma and Buddhism and then starting to practice really gave my life meaning.
And when you embarked on that path, Trungpa Rinpoche was your teacher, right?
Yeah, he was. I met him in Scotland before he came to the United States in 1969.
Wow. Okay.
And then I left Scotland and went overland to India. This was my second trip back to India. And then I met His Holiness Karmapa, the 16th Karmapa.
Okay.
And I was ordained as a Buddhist nun by him. I was the first American Buddhist nun to be ordained by him. And that, so I was there in India and living in the Himalayas and studying Tibetan and practicing for several years. And so I didn't meet Trungpa Rinpoche again until the end of 1972, and I had met him in Scotland in 1969. So in between, I had really formative years as a Buddhist practitioner with Kalu Rinpoche and another kind of mountain yogi lama that nobody really knows much about named Apu Rinpoche. And then, of course, the great lamas such as Dujam Rinpoche and Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche and Kanju Rinpoche and so on. All these really amazing teachers were there at that time, too.
So
I had that sort of deep dive. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just was like, you were quite young when that was transpiring, right? I mean, yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if you do this, and it's sort of I guess antithetical to being here now and being in the present. But if you do look back on your life and look at yourself as a young seeker, and you were ordained as a Buddhist nun at quite a young age, and like what you were experiencing, what you were seeking and looking for, and the big realizations that you were, interpreting then, do they feel the same as what you experience now, or has there been an evolution or a change? Like you've been on this path for a very, very long time, and that makes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you old, but it's just you've been on it for a while, and that your devotion and your dedication, your discipline to it it really shows. So I'm just your relationship with the practice over the years. Has it changed much?
Yes and no. I would say from the very beginning, once I began to understand the teachings on the nature of mind, and Mahamudra teachings, Dzogchen teachings, that I had access to books and some teachings on that very early. I was ordained in 1970, and so that sort of depth, I guess you could say, hit on the nature of reality,
yes,
has not changed. But the disciplines that I've been through, the practices and so on that I've done for so many years, and then interfacing all that with eventually disrobing and becoming a mother and raising 3 children and, starting a center in Colorado and so on. All that has, within all that, it's changed. And I've, in a way, brought that to bear, brought my practice to bear on everything that's happened. And so I was changed by what happened, and I was influenced in terms of Buddhism in everything that happened in my life. So in a way it's been the same, and in a way it's constantly evolved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It does make sense. Yeah, I'm just taking in what you were saying. And like you said, you have been able to relate with the teachings in all aspects of your life as well. And when you mentioned that word disrobed, and went into, I guess in Hinduism, what they call the householder role. You decided to have children. Was that encouraged, or was it initially frowned upon? How did that work?
Neither, really. I made the decision. I told first Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche that I decided to give back my vows, and I didn't know what would happen. But he said, he said that's fine, but I can't take them because I'm not holding those vows, because he wasn't a monastic himself. Oh. So you need to give them back to Khyentse Rinpoche. And so when I actually gave them back, I was very nervous about what the reaction would be. But he was very just kind and said, dedicate the merit, the positive energy that you've accumulated in all these years as a nun to benefit all beings. And here's a purification practice you can do. And beyond that, there's nothing more that you need to do. Just, many people follow the path in a householder lifestyle and just dedicate the merit of this time to all beings.
Wow, that's beautiful, and that teaching, dedicating merit to all beings, can be applied to no matter what you're doing, right? So
yes,
yeah. You being a woman, being ordained, and then giving up your vows, and then retaking them. What was the relationship? I mean, early on in that culture, especially like when you went to Dharmasala and you came across these amazing teachers and the 16th Karmapa himself, and I mean, really extraordinary tales. Were women accepted into this culture, or did you have to earn your seat sort of more than others? How did that work?
Yeah. Well, first I just want to clarify, I never did retake my vows.
Oh, okay. I apologize.
Yeah, no, I gave back my monastic vows and never took them again.
Okay.
But anyway, as a woman, I honestly, I felt really supported by my teachers. I didn't feel there was an issue in terms of access to higher teachings, in terms of being respected and so on. Yeah. The first time I really had a aha moment about that was it was a big empowerment with Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche. And we would sit for 3 months receiving these whole series of empowerments, which are transmissions of tantric Buddhist practices. And so I went to those, and it was actually right before I disrobed. And I was told that because I was a nun, I had to sit behind all of the monks, including the 6-year-old monks who had just gotten ordained. And that was the first time I was like, what? Why? And then when I wrote my book, Women of Wisdom, many years later, I did research on Buddhism and discovered, that there is this definite sort of patriarchal approach to women and so on. But with my personal teachers, I didn't feel it.
They transcended that. Right? They just weren't about, that seemed petty to them, right? Like when I hear stories about Maharaji, about Neem Karoli Baba, he didn't, him too, as a Hindu Advaita guru, he didn't, women were welcome, Mas were welcome, it was all one. He just transcended that pettiness. Yeah. I didn't feel it myself, but it's definitely there, and it may be because I was Western that I was treated differently. Oh, that's interesting. Right.
The Tibetan nuns, really had difficulty. They were not treated as equal by any means, and often were not really given teachings. They were just told to say Om Mani Padme Hum, and
now why is that?
That kind of,
like, where are the roots of that? Where are they born from? I mean, is that from the European influence, sort of in Asia?
No.
Like, where is that picked up from? Because that's a very
no.
Yeah. I'm just
it's patriarchy. Patriarchy is all over the world.
Yeah.
It's definitely not coming from the West. In fact, the West is more enlightened about that, at least now, than many places. So it's just, patriarchal religion, which is all world religions, have a view of women as inferior and, can't be part of the priesthood or whatever.
Right.
But what happened within Buddhism, and it's something that I've written quite a bit about and studied quite a bit, is that at the time of the Buddha was quite revolutionary in many ways, in the sense that he taught that the caste system wasn't a valid way of classifying people, which is why now there's a big movement amongst the untouchables in India to become Buddhist, because that's the only way they can get out of being untouchables. But in any case, so the Buddha was that way. But when he was requested to ordain women by his stepmother, who actually raised him from birth, because his mother died just a few days after he was born, he refused. And so she went away, and then she came back with more people, having shaved her head and walked barefoot for hundreds of miles to where he was, and requested again. And then he refused again. And then Ananda, who was his cousin and his attendant, went to him and said, "Oh, Holy One, do women not have Buddha nature? Can they not reach nirvana?" And he said, "Yes, they do, and they can reach liberation, reach nirvana." And so Ananda said, "Then why won't you accept them into the Sangha?" And the Buddha actually changed his mind. And it's the only recorded time when the Buddha actually changed his mind in all of the Buddha's history. But it set the tone, that women were taken into the Sangha, which is the ordination into monastic life, but with reluctance. And then they had to have extra vows, and they were controlled by monks in many ways, and so on. So it just started out that way with women in Buddhism.
That's and like you say, I mean, that is present in all of the world's religions in some form or another, right? And yeah, and we're going to get into your book in a second, but it just made me think that being the case and being the way it is, and you just illustrated the Buddhist culture in that environment. We all are aware of, Catholicism's relationship with women in the priesthood and whatnot.
Yeah.
But the current environment, as we see in, the last year with the Me Too movement and everything that's kind of going on there, do you think overall is that going to kind of spill over into the religious world as well, and kind of maybe help, these religions reevaluate the role of the feminine in the church? Because it is a very fascinating time to see women's rights once again be reinvented and taking on a new voice.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if the spiritual world is dealing with it as well.
Well, I can tell you that, the Me Too movement and Time Is Up has a lot to do with sexual abuse.
Right.
And this is coming up in Buddhism as well. And there's a Lama in France, for example, who really independent of this movement, and before it started, he's been abusing women for years. But suddenly last summer, it really came out, and it was taken seriously, and he was asked to stop teaching. He was removed from the board of that organization which he had started, and so on. And so we are seeing that aspect changing, and seemingly independently, because this, as I said, it didn't happen after Me Too or after Harvey Weinstein and all that. It happened before, and it's coming out with other Buddhist teachers, unfortunately, as well. So there's that aspect, which is different than women actually being empowered within a tradition equally with men, right? That's different. And, the two things are connected clearly, but it's different. And so if your question is, do I see a shift in Buddhism in terms of women's empowerment and sort of being able to hold leadership within it and so on? Yes, I do see that. And I think the West has influenced Asia to some extent in that sense. And it's still a very patriarchal religion. And, women haven't been fully ordained in the Tibetan tradition for many years. And for years, 20 or 30 years, there's been a movement to try to get the full ordination back for women. It was lost in Tibet. And it seems like that's finally happening. But the amount of time it's taken for that to happen is ridiculous, in my view.
It's, it's totally ridiculous. And, I feel in religions that, have traditions that are thousands of years old, things tend to move very, very, very slowly because, these things, they don't happen overnight, right? But we live in a world to where things do need to move much quicker. We can't rest on the laurels of just, these things take time. It's a slow evolution. The world needs to. Have you, are you familiar with, I want to pronounce her name right, Jung Kwan, the Korean Buddhist nun?
No, I'm not. I don't think.
Yeah, she's...
Say more.
Yeah, her name is Jung Kwan. She's based in South Korea. I don't know what tradition of Buddhism, but she's also the chef. She's also like an amazing cook. And I guess the temple where she resides at, she cooks like this absolutely mind-blowing food. And she's kind of gotten some notoriety about her skills with sattvic temple cooking as well, but which has given rise to also, the women's, kind of the empowerment based in temple culture as well, which is a whole different thing.
I met a woman from Korea, a nun from Korea, who came to my center, Tara Mandala. I don't think she was a chef, but she was definitely doing a lot about women's empowerment in Korean Buddhism.
So, I want to talk about women's empowerment, and you pointed out that women's empowerment is connected but separate than the sexual abuse aspect of the Me Too movement. And your new book, Wisdom Rising, is about an exploration into the empowered feminine, and so just kind of starting at the beginning of that paradigm, when you say the empowered feminine and the divine feminine, walk us through that. What does that mean to you, and what does it mean to you in sort of relationship to every woman in the world?
Well, I like to shift that word empowerment to I-N, empowerment.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah, and that's really what my book is about. It's about the empowerment of the feminine and in men and women. So what is the force or the energy or the wisdom or the aspect of our being that is feminine that we need to find within ourselves before we can have that manifest externally? So a lot of the women's movement has been focused on changing things outside, and that's what we've been talking about so far, and since we've been talking.
Yeah.
And that is really important. And my journey and my point is that we need to find her inside us. We need to find that essence, full potency of the feminine within ourselves, and to be able to draw on that in order to change the external world and just in order to live our lives fully as empowered women or men with an empowered feminine within them. And so that's why my book focuses on inner development of that.
The embodiment.
Through the mandala principle. Yeah, and again, we could say the I-N embodiment, the embodiment. How do we find the feminine within ourselves that's genuine? Because again, what is the feminine? It's been so defined by patriarchy or our reaction to patriarchy, and much of the women's movement has been focused on getting the rights that men have, or the pay that they have, or the status that they have, or being able to do the jobs that they do, and so on. Right. So that's very important. And I feel that women have something unique that's different than what men have. And until we know that and we own it and we embody it, we won't actually be bringing the feminine into the world. When we, let's say, come into power in one way or another as a woman in the outer world, if we don't have that inner resource to draw upon, how can we? And because it's been defined so, the feminine has been defined by men, for men, for so long, it's hard to even know what that is. And so part of what we need to do is explore that and try to find, what is that? What is the feminine? What would it be if it wasn't oppressed? What would it be if we were able to fully be ourselves rather than even now, be more like men, so we can be more acceptable.
Right.
And so it's part of what my book is about is through the mandala, which is a template of wholeness that's universal, but specifically with the Tibetan Buddhist mandala of the 5 dakinis, who are embodiments of the wise and spiritual and fierce feminine, through that inner process with the mandala meditation practice and really understanding these 5 families and transforming our emotions into wisdom. Without that, our changes will be superficial and external and may not lead to the satisfaction that we're really looking for. And also, we won't be bringing to the table the unique and really precious qualities that women have that needs to be nurtured and drawn forth, so that as we are at the table, that we're bringing something different. We're not just men in women's clothing, or
my dad,
women in men's clothing.
One of my favorite quotes from my dad, and I don't tend to quote him too often, but is women who seek to be equal to men lack ambition. I love that because it's just so true.
Yeah.
So and I love this because that paradigm of especially in sort of the American vernacular of like women's equality, seeking to have equal pay and equal rights, and it's based on the principle of equality, not uniqueness. So through this process of the mandala of the five dakinis, and I know there are you talk about the five different aspects or representations of the different dakinis, the Buddha dakini and the Ratna dakini and whatnot. First, tell me what a dakini is and what that archetype looks like.
Well, the dakini is the embodiment of the wise feminine in its form, in a particular form. And the form of the dakini, as she is seen in Vajrayana Buddhism, is dancing. She's naked. She's equal to a Buddha. Her wisdom, the wisdom dakinis, is considered to be equal to that of a Buddha. And she's fierce. She's emanating flames of wisdom. Her wisdom is so intense that it's shooting out of her in flames. And so she has an uncompromising quality. And Trungpa Rinpoche said, she pulls the rug out from under you. When you think things are solid, and the ego is starting to really be able to try to establish itself, she'll pull the rug out from under you. So the dakini is also connected to emptiness and the teachings of the lack of inherent solidity of ourselves and our world. And that's the message of the dakini. So one of the things that really appeals to me about the dakinis is that they're fully female, but they're strong and they're not acquiescent. It's an archetype, if you will, that hasn't really been allowed in terms of the feminine. We have allowed the Virgin Mary or in Buddhism, Tara, or something, that the motherly, the peaceful, compassion aspect of the feminine. Sure. But the dakinis have this other, more wild aspect that's spiritual and sexual at the same time. And for me, as a woman, I really love that. I love that's an aspect of the spiritual that I can identify with. And I don't only have to be motherly and gentle and compassionate. I can say no. And this is what really tied my book and this whole process of the mandala work with the dakinis and so on to the movement that's happening with women now. And I was writing the book already, before Trump was elected. And then when I saw the Women's March with that 5 million women and men, their allies on 7 continents, and they were fierce. And they were also really full of humor and non-aggression. Yeah. So this combination of being able to stand up and say no or say yes and not be sort of acquiescent, to me, I was so moved by that. And I thought, wow, what if all these women had the dakini practice that they were doing at home, and then they were coming, into their lives or into these marches or whatever they were doing, that they would have that inner resource to draw upon. And wouldn't that change it for them? And in fact, I had the experience of teaching this practice to 150 women twice in a yoga center in Massachusetts. And the second time I came back to teach it, there was a woman who had been there the year before, and this was after the Women's March. It was in April. That was in January of that year. And she raised her hand and she said, I have to tell you something. I've done this practice now for the last year. And before it, I was depressed and I was complaining all the time about politics, but I never really did anything about it. My marriage was terrible, etc. And I've done this practice now for a year, and my life has completely changed. I feel strong, I feel independent, and I'm running for Congress.
That's amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's what we need more of, right? The future is feminine, right? That
was so amazing for me to hear her say that. And she said, I had to come this year to tell you what had happened to me doing this. And so that's when the book wasn't finished then, and that's when I really felt like, wow, we have to get this out to women so they can do it and change the world.
That's such a powerful story, and not to derail this into a political discussion, but that is, it's such a great story and metaphor and just a demonstrative example of the problem, with politics today. So many, great people don't want to get into it, so, don't want to run for Congress. So many empowered, don't want to, make a change on that level. And I am a believer, and I know a lot of people on my podcast disagree, but I am a believer in, that this system can be repaired. It isn't all lost, and that's people like that need to do it.
Yeah,
that's so cool. So this archetype and the dakini. I don't know if it's sort of when you speak of the dakinis in this context, if it's correct to break it down into the 5 different, the 5 families and the unique sets of qualities within each one. But on a whole, I just want to kind of talk about the sacred sexuality and the sacred feminine as it's represented in the dakini model. And, and this also, I know, I guess in my tradition, I know a little bit more about Kali than I do the dakinis, and it's similar, right? There's a similar...
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the empowered sacred feminine, empowered, embodied power woman living in the world today, kind of really owning her sexuality in a healthy, and just display of freedom and, powerness and adventure and just all the great things that sexuality does have to offer. What is it, like, I feel like that's always been kind of shut down and dampened, especially in Western culture. So is part of what your book is dealing with here and what you teach, this is also about teaching women to own that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's part of us. Yeah. So I'm not emphasizing sexuality particularly, but I'm saying that this is a beautiful and a powerful and a joyful part of us, and it should not be repressed. It should be able to be lived and appreciated. And the other thing is, it's not separate from spirituality. Sexuality and spirituality are not 2 different things. And wherever there's been a presence of the feminine in religion or in society, sexuality, as well as the body, embodiment, have been sacred. And so one of the things that I track right in the beginning of the book is how women and nature have been treated in a parallel way throughout history. So when women have been denigrated, so has nature. And when women have been respected, so has nature. And so, yes, sexuality is part of it, but it's also just the sacredness of of our bodies, of birth, of the home, of the world, the physical world as sacred. And that is, that in patriarchal religions, there's been an emphasis on transcendence of women and transcendence of nature. And both of them symbolizes that which is not God or that which is not spiritual. And so there's been this split that's also created the ecological situation we have in the world today, where man and men have felt that the world is here for us to use, to abuse. Even like where I lived here in Colorado and New Mexico, there's a sign that says, on the public lands, the land of many uses. Just like land is here for us to use and abuse is what it's ended up being. And so part of what is important about the feminine is that women have also been tied to ecological movements. And if you look worldwide at what the proportions are of people involved with the ecological movement, is many, many more women than men. And so, and that's this historical way that women and nature have been tied together, and women since just, I think, connected to birth and having a baby, and basically how much work that is, that makes you respect life,
Mother Earth.
Mother Earth.
Mother Earth, and at the very beginning of the book, and this is from Women of Wisdom, you wrote, being a dynamic principle, the dakini is energy itself. A positive contact with her brings about a sense of freshness and magic. And I thought of that because that, it's the same could be said about nature. You hear people who, get like have an experience out in some kind of, amazing, majestic, natural ecosystem. And it can be said they experience a sense of freshness and magic. So I see the polarities there, the similarities there, right? Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier, and I do, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about this a little bit, but about the practice and the mandala meditation practice. And, I know it's, a lot more than you can say in 10 minutes on a podcast, but what is the practice that people, or women and men, can start to do?
Right. Yeah. Well, the practice that I focus on in the book, in Wisdom Rising, is the mandala of the 5 dakinis. And as you said, there's 5 different families of dakinis, the center and the 4 directions. So the mandala, in case your listeners don't know what that is exactly, is a template of wholeness. And when we practice with a mandala, we literally place our minds, our psyche, into this, you could say, architecture of wholeness. And so we sit in the center of our mandala when we meditate. And then to the east is the Buddha family that transforms, the east is the Vajra family that transforms anger into the mirror-like wisdom. In the south is the Ratna family, the jewel family, connected to the element of earth that transforms pride, which is really feelings of inferiority, into the wisdom of equanimity, evenness. And then in the west, which would be behind us when we are the mandala, is the Padma family, and that transforms craving and desire into the wisdom of discernment. And then in the north is the Karma family, which transforms jealousy into all-accomplishing wisdom. And then in the center is the Buddha family, dakini, that transforms ignorance or spaciness into the wisdom of all accommodating space. So that's just a very quick review of the 5 families. But the point being that most of the time our minds are random, right? We go from one thought to another. I think I should call so-and-so. I better do this. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. And so on. We're constantly in a state of random reactivity.
Yep.
And what happens when you place your mind in a structure of the mandala is this universal template of wholeness heals the fragmentation of the psyche, which is why Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, used mandalas to essentially heal his patients. And he also saw mandalas emerge from his patients as they were healing. And so the placing of the mind within the mandala has different than mere mindfulness, where we try to come out of that fragmented state into the present, because you're placing your mind within a symbolic structure that has sound and color and light associated with all these wisdoms that I mentioned before. And then you hold it there essentially in the same way you would with mindfulness. Your mind wanders, you come back to it, and then you begin to come into the center of your world, so that when you have done the mandala meditation, you are living out of that centeredness. And so your family, your friends, your job, whatever, that's part of your mandala. And the world is the greater mandala. But you're moving within a state of wholeness that has very specific transformative qualities that are traditional. And the sounds, there's a sound, what's called a seed syllable associated with each family, and color and so on. So it's very kind of juicy meditation. Plus, you're working with these female energies, the dakinis. And so it has a very dynamic quality.
Wow, amazing. And this is, this can be applicable for men as well, right? To, get in touch with, with their feminine side.
Yes, and definitely, because, I have written a lot about women in this book and so on, and, recommending this for women. But in Tibet, which is just where this comes from, it would absolutely be equal numbers of men and women doing dakini practice. All male practitioners do dakini practice, and all female practitioners do male yidams, male deity practice. So it's another interesting thing about tantric Buddhism is that it's sort of gender fluid, in the sense that you, as a practitioner, you experience yourself as male or female, and everybody does. And the Yab practices, where there's a union of male and female, you also experience yourself as that. So yes, definitely works for men too.
I love that. And I would, extend that thinking and the importance of that practice for men as well, and that men needing to nurture and get in touch with their sacred feminine, and the embodiment of that within their individual lives is such an important, necessary ingredient for the future of our planet, right? Because men and, aggression, trying to conquer things, and sort of the A-type cliched paradigm of, conquering and war, and these are such male behaviors.
Yeah, yeah, they are, unfortunately. And men have many beautiful qualities too. And, I think their protective quality, the nurturing aspect of the masculine, and so on, and skillful means. That's, in tantric Buddhism, skillful means is the masculine. And so just that ability to do things, and not that women can't do things, but I built this center here with my husband, and there were just so many things that, he could just do that were extraordinary. And so, although I emphasize the qualities of the feminine, the need for her, I also think it's very important for men to get in touch with the positive masculine and the sacred masculine, and nurture that within themselves as well, and to also nurture the feminine, and which doesn't mean they become like women, but like Jung said, a man who's out of touch with his feminine will be moody and get angry easily and quickly. And so you can see that, it's same with women need to know their masculine as well.
Yes.
And, if they're, if anyone's too slanted in one direction or another, they're not balanced.
Right. Lack of equanimity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So the book is Wisdom Rising, Journey into the Mandala of the Empowered Feminine, Lama Tsultrim. Such a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. And if people want to keep up on your teachings and where you're at and traveling, they go to taramandala.org.
Yes, TARAMANDALA.org. And the other place that we're doing a lot now, and also where there's a lot of live teachings and so on, is Facebook. I'm doing live teachings there, and my schedule and so on. So it's Lama Tsultrim Allione, my public figure page.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for doing the podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, yeah, it's wonderful to be with you, Zach.